Out here, justice rode a horse. Graves didn't need names, and some trails never led home. The Wild West wasn't just lawless, it was haunted. Haunted by gold that vanished, towns that blinked out of existence, and killers who left no tracks. Some say it was the landscape. Others say it was something worse. Silence that watched you back. Tonight, we're not chasing answers. We're digging up the questions time was too scared to keep. These are the 49 most unsettling, unsolved, and unreasonable mysteries of the Old West. And no, they still don't make sense. Before we ride any deeper into the unknown, make sure you're subscribed. We've got a long trail ahead, and trust me, you don't want to get lost out here alone. And while you're at it, drop a comment below. Where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Midnight in Montana? Sunrise in Singapore? Let's see who else is awake chasing ghosts with us. The disappearance of the USS Cyane's crew, 1846. It started as a routine military operation. If anything involving gunboats, imperial ambitions, and dusty frontier towns can ever be called routine. The USS Cyane, a sloop of war in the U.S. Navy, had landed in Monterey, California in 1846. It was wartime. Mexican-American tensions were peaking. The ship had a full crew, battle orders, and presumably a sense of purpose. And then a third of the crew just left. Deserted, vanished, in a war zone, without even a dramatic mutiny or ominous sea shanty to mark the occasion. Some of the men wandered off into the Golden Hills and were never seen again. Others were rumored to have melted into the burgeoning settlements, taken up lives as fur traders, gamblers, or worse, Californians. One account claims a group of them became gold prospectors 3 years before the gold rush officially started. Visionaries or very confused sailors. Jury's still out. The Navy tried to spin it. Maybe they got lost. Maybe they were taken prisoner. Maybe they were just really bad at land navigation. But that doesn't explain why the absences were so selective. Some left with weapons. Some took nothing but the boots on their feet. Some disappeared in groups, others solo. None left notes, not even a passive-aggressive one. Naturally, conspiracy theories bubbled up like swamp gas. Alien abduction was disappointingly not proposed, but suggestions ranged from covert espionage to cult activity. One 19th-century preacher claimed the men had been lured into the wilderness by a satanic sect disguised as missionaries. Another theory? The crew caught a glimpse of inland California and decided, yeah, this is fine, and never looked back. Official records remain vague, evasive, and peppered with euphemisms like missing without formal leave. No comprehensive search was launched. Why? Because, apparently, you can just lose 30 men and keep it pushing, as long as you say it sternly enough. What really happened to those sailors? Lost? Reborn? Murdered? Enchanted by some inland siren singing promises of land deeds and cold beer? Nobody knows, but in the Wild West, even Navy men weren't safe from its strange gravitational pull, the kind that turns order into myth and discipline into desertion. Which brings us to the next riddle, where the shooter is invisible, the bullets are real, and the motive island. Anyone's guess. The case of the phantom gunman of Humboldt County, 1892. Somewhere in the lonely canyons of Northern California, where the trees get too tall to trust and the fog wears a knife, there was a shooter, a good one. No, a great one. A ghostly gunslinger who appeared from nowhere, shot from nowhere, and vanished into, you guessed it, absolutely nowhere. It started in the 1892nd. Ranchers began to report that their livestock was being picked off by an unseen sniper. At first, they blamed poachers, then feuding neighbors, then the usual suspects, wolves, outlaws, possibly vengeful former employees. But then, the shots started coming for the ranchers themselves. Clean, precise hits. A man riding his horse suddenly topples off, bullet in the shoulder or neck or back. Always a single shot. Always from a direction that offered no line of sight. Always no one there. People started traveling in groups. Still happened. They posted lookouts. Still happened. They tried to lay traps, dig ambushes, hire bounty hunters. Nothing worked. There was never a warning shot. Just a distant crack, a collapsing body, and an impossible silence. One theory posited that the gunman used an experimental long-range rifle. Another claimed he was an ex-military sharpshooter gone feral. But how did he move so fast? Why were there never tracks? Why didn't he finish the job most of the time the victims lived? One man, paranoid beyond repair, spent years turning his homestead into a fortress. He hung tin cans on strings around his property, like Christmas decorations for the deranged. In 1899, he was found dead, shot in the leg, bled out in his own barn. No signs of entry, no gunman, no motive, just one can swinging slightly in the breeze. By the early 1902nd, the shooting stopped. Just stopped. No arrests, no suspects, no confessions. It was as if the phantom gunman had clocked out. Or died. Or grown bored. Was it one person? A group? Was it a deeply committed practical joke that got wildly out of hand? Whatever it was, Humboldt County never found out. And if you ask the right old families in the right whiskey-soaked bars, some will swear the shooter still walks the ridgelines, looking for targets who don't believe in ghosts with rifles. But speaking of ghosts and gold, our next mystery involves a man with one leg, 3 nuggets, and a map that leads nowhere fast. The lost mine of old Pegleg Smith. Thomas L. Pegleg Smith was a prospector, a storyteller, and, as his name helpfully implies, a man with one wooden leg. He claimed to have found a hill, no, a mountain littered with gold nuggets as black as a preacher's soul. He said he stumbled across it in the 1832nd, somewhere in the Colorado desert. 3 nuggets, smooth and heavy, like fate in your palm. He showed them to friends. They were tested, real gold. Not fool's gold, not painted rocks. Pure, beautiful, blackened gold. So where's the mine? Pegleg couldn't remember. He said he was dehydrated at the time, sunblind, possibly delirious. He had taken a shortcut, which is historically the most expensive word in prospecting. By the time he realized what he'd found, it was already gone, swallowed by the heat, the wind, and whatever cosmic prankster haunts treasure hunters. Over the next few decades, dozens of expeditions launched into the desert to retrace his route. Some came back empty-handed. Some didn't come back at all. Pegleg himself never found it again. He died as broke as he lived, except now with legends stapled to his name. Eventually, entire Pegleg Smith festivals popped up celebrating a man whose greatest contribution to geology was not finding things. People brought black rocks to be judged. They swapped bad maps like recipes. They told stories about curses and treasure and lost souls boiling in the desert Sunday. To this day, people still search for the mine. Some even claim to have seen the black nuggets again. One man in the 1952nd said he found the same hill but was chased away by a glowing figure. Another said he found the gold and tried to sell it, but it mysteriously turned to regular rock under laboratory lights. So, was it a hallucination? A prank? A tall tale spun by a one-legged con man? Or is there a real mountain of black gold still sitting out there, quietly mocking everyone who thinks they're smarter than a desert? And if gold can disappear that easily, what about entire towns? Because that's exactly what comes next. A booming western settlement that one day was just gone. The vanishing town of Paradise Valley, Nevada, 1862. For a place named Paradise, It sure had a short lease on existence. Paradise Valley, Nevada, mid-1802nd. A mining town that sprouted out of the desert like a stubborn weed, complete with saloons, general stores, and the kind of optimism that only happens when gold and silver start whispering to men's egos. Boomtowns were nothing new out west, but Paradise Valley wasn't just another tent city with illusions of grandeur. It had infrastructure. It had families. It had a school, for heaven's sake. And then one day, it just vanished. Not like everyone packed up and left, slowly. Not like, hey, the mine dried up, and it became a ghost town. Number vanished. Buildings half finished. Meals abandoned. Livestock still tethered. A piano still playing, supposedly, when the first traveler rolled through and found the town as empty as a politician's promise. There were no reports of raiders, no fires, no flood, just nothing. A community that went from chatter and clamor to utter silence, seemingly overnight. A few nearby ranchers came in and scavenged what was left, of course. Someone always does. But none of them could explain why no one was there, or why none of the residents were ever heard from again. Some claimed there had been signs. Eerie lights over the mountains, strange sickness among the children, a preacher who started speaking in tongues and warning of a turning. One prospector said the town had struck a new vein that hummed. He left that same day and lived to tell the tale. The others? Not so lucky. The newspapers, when they bothered to report it at all, chalked it up to mining hysteria. You know, the kind of polite term you use when dozens of people disappear and you'd rather not have to investigate in the middle of nowhere. No bodies were ever found. No mass grave. No personal belongings scattered to suggest a sudden attack. Just a valley where something, perhaps economic collapse, perhaps something darker, swept through like a biblical debt collector. And while we're on the subject of people disappearing without a trace, let's go back even further, before prospectors, before Paradise Valley, before Nevada was even Nevada, to a group of fur trappers who followed a river into the unknown and never came back. The legend of the Owyhee River Hawaiians, 1819. Long before the Wild West had its name, long before six-shooters and stagecoaches became cliches, there were the Hawaiians. Yes, Hawaiians. In 1819, a group of native Hawaiian fur trappers, recruited by the British Hudson's Bay Company, ventured deep into what's now Idaho and Oregon, tasked with mapping and trapping in the brutal, frozen reaches of the Pacific Northwest. They were skilled, resourceful, and, one assumes, very confused about why they'd been shipped from tropical paradise into a hellscape of sleet and pine needles. They followed the river now known as the Owyhee, a misspelling of Hawaii named in their honor, or perhaps in their memory. Because they vanished. Not in a drifted off and settled kind of way. There are no Hawaiian-descended enclaves in the high deserts of Idaho. Not in a died tragically but were accounted for way. No bones, no journals, no wreckage of a failed camp. Just gone. Some historians suggest native tribes in the region may have killed them. Others say they perished in the wilderness, their bodies claimed by snowdrifts and bears. Still others whisper about stranger things, giants, lights, portals, curses, because this is the Wild West, and the absence of facts has always been fertile soil for the absurd. And yet, their legend lingers. The Owyhee River became the only monument to their existence, its name an echo of men who left no legacy but mystery. For decades, trappers and settlers reported seeing ghostly islanders along the banks, brown-skinned figures with long hair, speaking in unknown tongues, always just out of reach. Were they hallucinations? Did a few of the trappers survive and assimilate quietly into local tribes? Or did something far stranger happen out there in the frostbitten shadows of the canyon? We'll never know, but we do know this. Nobody names a river after you unless your exit was dramatic. Speaking of dramatic exits, Let's fast forward to a Wild West outlaw who finally tried to go straight, only to die in a hotel room with nobody quite sure how, why, or if he even deserved a clean ending. The peculiar death of Doc Middleton. 1913. James Riley, better known by his marketing-friendly outlaw name, Doc Middleton, was a horse thief, a gambler, a sometimes murderer, and, toward the end of his life, an aspiring innkeeper with a bad habit of cheating at cards. By 1913, the man who once stole entire herds from under cavalry noses had slowed down. He'd traded revolvers for a hotel desk in Ardmore, Oklahoma. A long way from his Nebraska heyday, but quieter, simpler, cleaner, until he turned up dead. No gunfight, no standoff, no final slow-motion duel in a dusty street, just one dead outlaw in a rented room, found by a cleaning woman who thought he was sleeping off a hangover. And maybe he was. Maybe. But his cause of death was never fully established. Some said stroke, others said alcohol poisoning. A few whispered that he was poisoned by rivals, by lovers, by ghosts of horses long since rustled. No autopsy, no investigation, just a quick burial and a collective shrug. And yet, things didn't add up. Witnesses claimed Doc had gotten into an argument the night before, something loud, something about money, something that ended in threats. A bartender said Doc was in perfect health that evening. Another claimed he'd looked gray and hollowed out. A third insisted the man Doc was with had disappeared right after. Then there's the matter of the room itself. The mirror was cracked, the window locked from the inside. His boots were missing. Why? Who takes a dead man's boots? Some say Middleton faked his death again and slipped away one last time, bootless but free. Others say his enemies finally caught up with him and made sure he went out quietly, undramatically, the cruelest death possible for a man who'd built a myth on noise. Whatever happened, his grave is real. His legend is still debated, and his exit remains one of the least satisfying endings in outlaw history. But if you think a dead outlaw is strange, wait until you hear about the ghost boat that still steams up the Ozarks right on schedule, decades too late. The Riddle of the White River Ghost Ship, 1882. It's not every day you see a steamboat drift down a river with no crew, no smoke, and no splash, especially if that river hasn't seen commercial navigation in decades. But in the Ozarks, where the trees lean in a little too close and the fog seems sentient, the White River has its own bedtime story, a phantom steamboat. It's been spotted by ranchers, hunters, drunks, and people who swear they were stone-cold sober just unlucky. They all describe the same thing, a full-sized paddle steamer chugging silently upriver against the current, its lanterns lit with flickering yellow flames, casting long, impossible shadows on the trees. Sometimes they hear music, a fiddle tune, old and off-tempo, like it's being played underwater or by someone who forgot how to smile. And then it vanishes. No splash, no wake, no sound of wood cracking or metal grinding, just a slow fade into nothing, like the river itself is swallowing the illusion out of embarrassment. Now, there's no historical record of any steamboat sinking dramatically in that exact stretch of the White River. No big tragedy, no mass drowning, no famous captain lost in a storm. Which, of course, makes it worse, because it suggests one of two things. Either the boat never existed, or it exists outside of what we call real. One theory? It's a time loop. The ghost of a steamboat caught in a moment that refuses to die, doomed to repeat its lonely voyage until someone finally waves back. Another theory says it's a death omen, that anyone who sees it is marked, which is very inconvenient if you're just trying to fish and suddenly get a visit from 19th century riverboat purgatory. One man claimed he saw it during a lightning storm, said it was glowing blue, sparking as it moved, the paddle wheel turning through air instead of water. He died a week later. But to be fair, he was 93, and had eaten nothing but beef jerky for a decade, so maybe that's on him. Still, the sightings continue rare, yes, but persistent, and no one's gotten close. Try to follow it, and it slips away. Try to film it, and the camera dies. Try to ignore it, and, well, it comes back. Which brings us to another missing marvel. A canyon full of gold, accidentally discovered by pioneers who were in too much of a hurry to become rich. Spoiler, they never found it again. The Lost Blue Bucket Mine of Oregon, 184. There's something deeply American about stumbling into a fortune and then immediately forgetting where you left it. In 1845, a group of settlers, let's call them the Goldilocks expedition, were traveling along a particularly hellish part of the Oregon Trail. Somewhere in the deserts of eastern Oregon, they got lost. Which, again, was sort of the national pastime at the time. To pass the time, and possibly to avoid murdering each other, some of them decided to go rock hunting. Because that's what you do when your oxen are dying and morale is a myth. A few kids found some shiny, blackish-yellow rocks in a dry creek bed. They brought them back in, yes, a blue bucket. The adults, being incredibly wise pioneers with survival instincts honed to perfection, shrugged and said, "Neat. Leave it. We're late for Oregon." Sometime later, when the party made it to a fort, someone finally looked at the rocks and realized they were gold. Not just gold nuggets. They had literally tripped over one of the richest placer deposits in the American West and walked away from it because they couldn't be bothered. This launched one of the longest-running and least successful treasure hunts in U.S. history. People have been searching for the Lost Blue Bucket Mine for over a century and a half. The problem? Nobody can agree where they were when they found it. The original wagon train was en route. The accounts are vague. One says it was a dry stream. Another says it was under a rocky overhang. One version claims the rocks were actually in 2 blue buckets. So now we've got sequel problems. It doesn't help that half the evidence comes from family oral history, which, as we all know, is mostly lies and selective memory wrapped in nostalgia. Every year or two, someone claims they've found it. Every year or two, they quietly backpedal when it turns out their shiny rocks are just quartz, or pyrite, or dreams. But hope is eternal, and the idea of gold hiding in plain sight continues to lure the desperate, the curious, and the geologically confused. After all, if some kids with a bucket found it once, why not you? Of course, if gold can vanish, so can horses. Especially when they belong to a man like John Slaughter, and they start dropping dead in ways no vet, outlaw, or priest can explain. The Mysterious End of John Slaughter's Horses, 1892. John Slaughter wasn't the kind of man you'd accuse of being mystified by anything. Ex-Texas Ranger, Arizona cattle baron, gunfighter, politician, border war hobbyist. The sort of person who looked at chaos and asked it to wait its turn. So when his horses started dying mysteriously, people paid attention. It began quietly. One of his prize stallions was found dead in the middle of a field. No wounds, no sickness, just dead. Rigor mortis frozen in mid-gallop. Then another, and another. Within months, a dozen valuable horses were gone. Veterinarians couldn't explain it. No signs of poison, no common illness, no hoof and mouth, no bad feed. Just sudden, inexplicable death, like the Grim Reaper had gotten picky about livestock. Slaughter, not a man fond of ambiguity, reportedly suspected sabotage. Rivals, rustlers, maybe Mexican bandits with a grudge. But no evidence ever surfaced, no break-ins, no tracks. Nothing missing except the horses themselves. Then things got weirder. Neighbors began reporting strange lights on the property at night, floating orbs, flickering like lanterns made of swamp gas. Slaughter's ranch hands claimed to hear whispers near the stables. though nobody ever saw anyone. One man said he walked into the corral one morning and found all the horses facing the same direction, staring at something that wasn't there. And then he left, moved to Tombstone, never came back. Some say Slaughter took the mystery to his grave. Others think he solved it, didn't like the answer, and decided not to share. Because what if the truth was something too ridiculous to say out loud? A curse? A spirit? Government experiments? Years before there was a government that cared? Or maybe it was simpler. Maybe the land was sick, or the air, or something lived out there in the desert, watching, waiting, and occasionally sampling the local livestock like it was running a twisted buffet. Slaughter never filed a formal complaint, never made it public, but the deaths stopped as suddenly as they began. Whatever it was, it ended, or moved on. But speaking of things with no name and no closure, what do you make of a grave in Tombstone, marked only unknown, filled with a story that nobody can quite finish? The Unidentified Man in the Boot Hill Grave, 1882. Tombstone, Arizona. A name as subtle as a sledgehammer. A town born of silver, scandal, and more bullets than reasons. And at the edge of it, past the saloons, past the legends, past the infamy, sits Boot Hill Cemetery, where the West buried its regrets and didn't bother with last names. Among the many graves marked with poetic cruelty, shot over a card game, hanged by mistake, he was right, we were wrong. There's one that's stubbornly simple. Just a plain wooden board, scorched by sun and rumor, etched with a single word, unknown. No dates, no birth, no death, no story officially. But unofficially? Oh, it's got plenty. Some say the man was found in an alley behind the Birdcage Theater, bleeding from a gunshot wound with no weapon in sight. Others claim he staggered into the Grand Hotel, muttered something about gold in the canyon, and dropped dead in the lobby before anyone could fetch whiskey or questions. A few believe he was a hired killer, double-crossed and dumped, like last week's poker debt. Others think he was an Eastern businessman who got lost on a sightseeing trip and discovered, too late, that sightseeing in Tombstone was a contact sport. The most intriguing theory? He was someone important, a runaway heir, a disgraced lawman, a fugitive with secrets too heavy to carry and too dangerous to share. And the town, for whatever reason, fear, guilt, superstition, decided to bury him quietly. There were attempts to identify him. Newspapers ran vague descriptions: tall, light-haired, missing one boot, only one. That detail never gets explained. But no one came forward. No family, no bounty hunters, no enemies, just silence. Years later, amateur historians tried to exhume the body, hoping for clues. They found bones, a gold tooth, a coin minted in 1871, and nothing else. The mystery remained, wearing its anonymity like a crown. The grave still draws visitors. People leave coins, notes, cigars, prayers, maybe out of respect, maybe out of hope that someone will remember who he was. Or maybe because we all know, deep down, that being forgotten is worse than being buried. And if anonymity can outlast a century, what happens when the forgotten are also robbed, as in the case of the Bender family's victims, whose belongings are still missing, somewhere? The disappearance of the Bender family's victims' belongings, 1872. If the Wild West had a Hannibal Lecter, it was the Bender family, except they weren't charming, and they didn't bother with Chianti. They ran a modest little inn in Labette County, Kansas, just a roadside stop with a general store, a meal, and, for the unlucky, a trap door that opened straight into hell. Travelers would arrive, eat, sit near the canvas partition where Ma and Pa Bender served stew, and then, if the mood struck, be hit in the back of the head with a hammer and dropped into the basement. Efficient, if a little unsubtle? By the time their operation was uncovered, the Benders had vanished. Along with them, dozens of victims' belongings. We're talking jewelry, coins, weapons, even livestock, all unaccounted for. The shallow graves had bodies, but no gear, and back then, even a tin cup was valuable. The kind of valuables people travel with their life savings tucked in belts, boots, bags, all gone. So where did it go? The Benders didn't live lavishly. Their home was a glorified shack. No hidden vaults, no buried treasure under the floorboards, no trail of extravagant purchases. Just 2 simple wagons they escaped in, and possibly a few aliases too clever for their own good. Some believe they buried the loot somewhere nearby, planning to return. Others think they had accomplices locals who helped cover for them in exchange for a cut. That would explain why so few people asked questions, even after travelers kept vanishing like they'd stepped into fog. A few conspiracy buffs suggest the family split up and used the stolen goods to restart their lives elsewhere. One woman in New Mexico was rumored to be Ma Bender under a new name. A quiet, polite woman who hated guests. But nothing was ever confirmed. No bodies, no belongings, no confessions. Even today, metal detector hobbyists and ghost town fanatics wander the old Bender homestead, hoping to ping a box of coins or a rusted revolver. They find nails, maybe a horseshoe, but not the haul that vanished with Kansas's most homicidal innkeepers. And if stolen heirlooms can vanish into dust, imagine what happens to people who try to vanish themselves like the Apache Kid, who escaped, ran, and somehow never, ever stopped running. The case of the Apache Kid's unexplained freedom, 1892, early 1902. The Apache Kid wasn't born a legend, he earned it. Scout, soldier, outlaw, ghost. First, he worked for the U.S. Army, tracking his own people for a paycheck and a strange, bitter sense of survival. Then he got into a mess, a murder that may or may not have been self-defense depending on which side of the whiskey bottle you were standing on. Then came the trial, the sentence, the prison transfer, and the escape. And from there, he turned into smoke. The Kid, real name unknown, real origin debated, vanished into the Southwest like he belonged to the terrain. He was spotted dozens of times. In New Mexico, in Arizona, once in Mexico, even once in California. He always vanished again. Each report came with the same contradictions. Some said he'd grown a beard, others said he looked ageless. Some swore he was traveling with a woman. Others said he'd become a solitary shadow, riding with no trail, leaving no prints. The military kept trying to recapture him. Local sheriffs issued warrants. Bounty hunters swore they were closing in. And every time, he slipped away, sometimes by a few hours, sometimes by years. Theories bloomed like cactus flowers. Some said he had helped secret networks of sympathizers, possibly even people he once hunted. Others claimed he became a kind of cryptid, half human, half myth, a desert spirit with a grudge and perfect aim. One thing's certain. No official ever confirmed his death. There were stories, lots of them. One body, found in a canyon, sun-bleached and bullet-riddled, was believed to be his, then ruled out. Another tale said he died peacefully in Mexico under a new name, with grandchildren and a quiet life. Then someone else claimed they'd seen him after that obituary. Even today, historians can't close the book on him, because you can't kill what never shows up for the ending. The Apache Kid walked off the edge of the official record and didn't stop. And sometimes, people still claim to see a rider in the distance, where the dust never settles and the law never quite reaches. And if you're wondering what happens to the horse of a vanished legend, well, the lost Dutchman's mule has a story all its own, and it too never came back. The Enigma of the Lost Dutchman's Horse, 1882. If you thought the Lost Dutchman's mine was the only mystery clinging to the Superstition Mountains like a tick with trust issues, allow us to introduce you to his horse. Yes, his horse, or mule. or spectral beast of burden depends on who's telling the story. Jacob Waltz, the so-called Dutchman, was a German immigrant with a knack for secrecy, misdirection, and allegedly stumbling upon the richest gold deposit in Arizona. He died in 1891 without ever revealing the mine's location, a final act of pettiness that has powered thousands of failed expeditions, broken marriages, and ruined knees. But then there's the side story. The weird footnote that refuses to be dismissed. The tale of his final journey down from the mountains, alone, but supposedly accompanied by a heavily laden horse. Not just a little pack animal either. This thing was said to be carrying saddlebags full of gold, proof of the mine's existence, or perhaps a final cruel prank. Except the horse never arrived. When Waltz was found deathly ill in Phoenix, sunburned, dehydrated, and babbling about that cursed hole, there was no horse, no gold, just him, muttering things like, "Don't go past the Black Rock," and "They'll kill you too." Typical Arizona goodbye. So, what happened to the horse? One theory is that the animal died on the trail, too tired, too old, too burdened with metaphor. But if that were true, where's the body, or the saddlebags, or anything? Another theory. The horse made it out, but was stolen. Locals say a drifter was seen leading a nervous-looking animal away from the base of the mountain the same day Waltz collapsed. That man was never identified, and the horse was never seen again. And then there's the third option. The one whispered about at campfires and dismissed in polite company, that the horse didn't die or get stolen, but is still out there. A ghostly pack animal, cursed to wander endlessly with gold that can never be spent. A four-legged symbol of greed, betrayal, and really bad GPS. Modern hikers occasionally report hearing hooves in places too rocky for any sane creature. Others claim to find deep hoofprints suddenly vanishing into hard stone. So if you're ever near the Superstition Mountains and hear a snort behind you, maybe don't turn around, especially if you're carrying a map. But if the spirits of gold are too subtle for you, let's move to something louder, a haunted hotel where death checked in, unpacked, and never left. The ghost of the Street James Hotel, Cimarron, New Mexico. Cimarron, New Mexico, where the whiskey ran cheap, the gun smoke hung thick, and the Street James Hotel stood like a bullet-riddled monument to poor decisions. Built in the late 1802, it wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a place to gamble, cheat, kill, and possibly die of whatever's watching from room 18. By all historical accounts, the Street James was wildly popular with outlaws and lawmen alike. Jesse James supposedly stayed there. Buffalo Bill, too. Which sounds romantic until you realize half the guests either ended up in Boot Hill or disappeared mid-poker hand. Over 24 deaths occurred in the hotel, mostly the kind that involve sudden shouting, table flipping, and bullets lodging in someone's lunch. Management, ever the pragmatists, simply patched up the walls and kept the drinks coming. But it's room 18 that gets all the attention. Locked to this day, no guests allowed, the staff avoids it, visitors are warned not to knock. Supposedly, the ghost inside, believed to be a murdered gambler or a particularly vengeful spirit with a taste for Victorian wallpaper, doesn't like to be disturbed. People who've stayed nearby report the usual. Cold spots, strange noises, furniture moving, lights flickering, but also far creepier visions of a shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed, breathing loudly, sometimes with a whisper, sometimes with your name. And then there are the dreamers. The ones who claim to have seen the room in their sleep perfectly described without ever entering. Drawings of the interior match accounts from the 1,802nd down to the blood-stained rug. One woman reportedly woke with bruises on her chest, in the shape of a boot. The owners, perhaps wisely, decided not to try and cleanse the place. Some things, after all, don't want to leave. They just want the room service to show up on time. So is it haunted? Or is the town just really, really good at marketing? You decide. But if ancient spirits and hotel room grudges aren't enough, let's raise the stakes. How about a cave deep in the desert, rumored to hold Montezuma's lost treasure, death traps, and curses older than history? The unfinished story of the Montezuma's treasure cave. Legend has it that when the Spanish arrived to conquer the Aztec Empire, Montezuma, no fool when it came to looters with god complexes, ordered his gold hidden, not just stashed, entombed. Deep in a secret cave, far from Mexico City, in a place the invaders would never dare look, the deserts of the American Southwest. It's a beautiful story, rich with greed, betrayal, colonial paranoia, and best of all, absolutely no conclusion. Multiple cave sites have been proposed over the centuries. Arizona, New Mexico, even parts of Utah. Each one has its obsessive devotees, its half-burnt maps, its whispered warnings about never going in alone. Some claim to have found the cave. They describe steep descents, strange symbols carved into stone, the smell of something ancient and wrong. A few say they reached a room filled with golden idols, skeletons in armor, and booby traps that would make Indiana Jones retire early. And then, just as quickly, they were driven out. How? Pick your poison. Some say by cave-ins. Some say by ghostly guardians, dark figures with glowing eyes and voices like crushed gravel. One man claimed he was followed home by a coyote that spoke in Nahuatl. It did not get invited in. None of these claims are verifiable. Most of the treasure hunters who tell the tale conveniently lose their maps, their photos, or their credibility. And yet the legend grows. Even government geologists have accidentally stirred the pot, mapping unusual cave systems that resemble the layouts described in these stories, and yet nothing official, nothing confirmed. Just layers of myth piled on top of possible history like cursed sediment. Why hasn't anyone brought back proof? Maybe the treasure was moved. Maybe it was never there. Or maybe it was, and everyone who touched it was erased. That's the power of an unfinished story. It tempts you with closure it has no intention of providing. And if ancient treasure guarded by spirits isn't unsettling enough, let's go further back before gold, before conquistadors, to the strange, silent massacre that left a Texas mission in ruins and riddled with questions. The strange case of the San Saba mission ruins, Texas, 1758. Texas history is built on the rubble of people who had no idea what they were signing up for, and the San Saba mission might be one of its eeriest foundations. Established in 1757 by Spanish missionaries in what is now Menard County, it was meant to bring the light of Christianity to the Apaches. Which, to be fair, is a bold move when you're unarmed, outnumbered, and building a church in enemy territory. Less than a year later, the light went out. In 1758, the mission was attacked and destroyed by a coalition of native groups, likely Comanche and Wichita, who, it turns out, weren't interested in religious conversion via adobe architecture. The assault was brutal. The mission was burned to the ground. Several missionaries were killed. Others were never accounted for. That much is official history. But then the questions begin. For starters, the attack was weirdly surgical. The fort next door, literally within shouting distance, was untouched. Not a single musket fired. Not a single soldier harmed. Why? Why take out the priests and leave the army? Survivors claimed the attackers moved like they knew the layout, like they'd been there before. Some say the mission was betrayed from within. Others say it wasn't a battle at all, it was a ritual. One missionary's body was supposedly found posed, not buried. Another's head was never recovered. And then there's the disappearing act. Several people, both Spanish and Apache, were present during the attack and vanished. No trace, no bodies, just gaps in records and hastily drawn illustrations of what probably happened. Over the years, ruins were uncovered, tunnels, scorched altars, half-buried religious items. Some showed signs of fire, others didn't. One wall had inscriptions in a language nobody could translate. Not Spanish, not Latin, certainly not Apache. Even now, the site feels off. People report unease. Metal detectors glitch. Some archaeologists refuse to work after dark. And the locals, those who still bother to care, won't speak the mission's name out loud. Why? Maybe because missions were more than just buildings. They were pressure cookers for spiritual ambition, cultural erasure, and paranoia, and sometimes that pot boiled over. And speaking of things disappearing into desert silence, our next mystery isn't a massacre, but a freighter so full of silver it should have jingled all the way home, if it had ever arrived. The disappearance of the Phantom Freighter of Death Valley, 1852. Death Valley. The name alone should have been enough to keep treasure hunters, freight caravans, and delusional opportunists far, far away. But this was the 1852nd, an era when people thought dehydration built character, and that dying in the desert was just part of the ambiance. So when rumors started spreading of a phantom freighter, a fully loaded wagon train carrying silver bullion across Death Valley that vanished without a trace, nobody batted an eye, until it stayed vanished. The legend goes like this. A small caravan of wagons, possibly coming from a Mexican mine, tried to cut through the valley to avoid toll roads, taxes, or common sense. The lead wagon was said to be carrying crates of silver ingots. The others were stacked with food, supplies, and supposedly armed guards. Enough muscle to keep out bandits. Enough cargo to make the whole journey worth risking heatstroke and scorpion-based emotional trauma. And then, nothing. They were never seen again. No wreckage, no bones, no discarded gear, just an empty trail and a lot of very quiet jackrabbits. Some searchers claimed to find wheel ruts. Others stumbled across bleached bones, human or animal. No one was sure. A few said they saw the freighter itself, rolling slowly in the moonlight, as if forever trying to finish a journey it couldn't survive. Was it a mirage? A cover-up? Did the team die of thirst, bury the loot, and crawl away into legend? Or was it something stranger? The desert, after all, doesn't just kill, it erases. The wind smooths out footprints. The sand buries wagons like gossip. And when people go missing out there, they stay missing. Conveniently. Completely. And yet, no one ever found the silver. Not one bar. Not one hint of what was lost. Even when Death Valley became a national monument, treasure hunters with shovels and dreams kept coming. None left with silver. A few didn't leave at all. So maybe it's still out there. Maybe the desert is guarding it. Or maybe someone found it long ago and knew better than to tell. Either way, the desert took a wagon train and turned it into a rumor. But if you think that's strange, wait till you hear about the ships, yes, ships that supposedly lie buried beneath those same sands, sails and all. The enigmatic, sunken ships in the Colorado desert. Picture this. You're trudging through the scorching Colorado desert, dry as a chalkboard, flat as a bad joke, and you see it. Rising from the dunes, a mast, maybe a hull, maybe an entire ship. What? That's the question. For over a century, people have claimed to see the wreckage of ancient ships stranded miles inland in the middle of the California desert, Spanish galleons, Viking longships, Confederate paddle steamers. Depending on who you ask, it's either maritime history's biggest typo or the best hidden treasure hunt never approved by National Geographic. The most persistent version of the tale involves a Spanish treasure ship loaded with pearls sailing up the Gulf of California during a particularly wet season, back when parts of the desert were submerged by ancient lakes and freak floods. The crew, realizing they were lost, allegedly abandoned ship somewhere near the Salton Sink. Nature did the rest. Over the years, cowboys, miners, and drifters have all claimed sightings. One said he found a full hull poking out of the sand, complete with cannon holes and barnacles. Another described ornate carvings and rusted iron anchors, half swallowed by dunes. Yet every time someone goes back to verify, the ship has either moved, vanished, or turned into a large, suspiciously boat-shaped rock. Skeptics, of course, roll their eyes. Desert mirages, they say. Wishful thinking, they say. People don't just lose ships in the desert. But they do, apparently. Or at least they lose their minds thinking they saw one. Still, there's something persistent about this tale. Something sticky. Explorers have scoured the area with ground-penetrating radar, metal detectors, and drones. Nothing. But also, no definitive debunking, which is the mystery equivalent of leaving the back door wide open. And let's not forget, stranger things have happened. This is a land where mountains move, rivers vanish, and history sometimes forgets to double-check itself. So maybe the ship is real. Maybe it carried treasure. Or maybe it carries something worse, a legend too seductive to let die. And speaking of inexplicable fortunes, the next mystery involves a man who showed up filthy rich, left no instructions, and disappeared like the West's most extravagant magician. The unexplained wealth of Diamond Jack Davis, 1872. Diamond Jack Davis walked into Arizona territory like he'd just escaped a jewelry store. Explosion, dusty boots, ragged clothes, and pockets jangling with uncut diamonds. Not a few, not a handful, a pouchful. In the 1872nd, that kind of entrance was less suspicious and more economically disruptive. Jack bought drinks for entire towns, gambled like he couldn't lose, and tossed diamonds around like they were poker chips. People asked questions, naturally. Where'd you get all that? What mine? Is this even real? Jack just smiled with a mouthful of gold teeth and said, Somewhere you'll never find. Classic. Rumor had it he'd stumbled onto a secret diamond field deep in the Arizona wilderness, so rich that you could scoop up the ground like trail mix. But when pressed for details, Jack got vague. South of Tucson, up near the dry mesa, near the spot where the rocks sing, whatever that meant. No maps, no witnesses, no repeat expeditions, just a trail of glittering breadcrumbs that went nowhere. People tried to follow him. Literally. One man paid a tracker to tail him out of town. Jack lost him within a day. Another man offered him $10,000 for the location. Jack said no. Then disappeared for 3 weeks. When he came back, he was wearing a diamond-studded hat and had less to say. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, Jack vanished. Some say he was killed. Some say he faked his death. Others believe he cashed out, hopped a steamer to South America, and lived out his life among parrots and deniability. No one ever found the diamond field. No one even found convincing evidence of it. But the diamonds were real, tested, appraised, sold. The money moved, just not the source. Maybe he found a cache hidden by an earlier prospector. Maybe he robbed a shipment and crafted the legend as cover. Or maybe, just maybe, he did find something out there. And he was smart enough to know that greed kills faster than bullets. So he kept the location a secret, took the mystery to the grave, or at least out of reach. But if you think an entire mine going missing is strange, how about a whole town that imploded under the weight of violence, betrayal, and secrets that never quite died? The mystery of the vanishing town of Ruby, Arizona, early 1902. Ruby was the kind of town the West built on dreams and then demolished with a bad temper. Located near the Mexican border, it started out promising. A mining settlement with a school, a general store, and enough silver to pretend civilization was inevitable. But Ruby didn't just fade away like other ghost towns. It evaporated. The buildings stayed. The people didn't. In the early 20th century, Ruby was rocked by a string of murders so grim they earned their own name, the Ruby Murders. Storekeepers shot execution, style, families vanished overnight. The sheriff came and went with theories, but no solutions. Witnesses changed their stories. Some changed their addresses. The town began to die, not economically, but emotionally. Kids stopped going to school. Shop windows stayed boarded up. People locked their doors in broad daylight. The sense of dread was so thick, it fogged up the desert. Then came the silence. One day, Ruby was a nervous town on edge. The next, it was empty. No final exodus. No fire or disaster. Just a growing consensus that it was no longer a place where people belonged. And here's the kicker. Nobody took their stuff. Beds were still made. Dishes sat in sinks. Store shelves had unopened goods. It looked like a town that had paused for lunch and never unpaused. Some say the remaining residents just walked away. Others say something drove them out, something more than fear, something unspoken. Ghost stories sprouted fast. A woman seen in the schoolhouse window, rocking in a chair that wasn't there. The sound of gunshots echoing on windless nights. Whispering in the mine shafts, always in a language nobody quite recognized. Researchers came later. Paranormal investigators. Tourists with audio recorders. No definitive answers, just more layers of creepy ambiance. Ruby remains preserved, frozen in that eerie moment between life and afterlife. A town that once was, and now isn't, except in the rust and the whispers. And if ghost towns can echo violence, then it's no surprise that even the roads carry their own phantoms, like a stagecoach that rides without horses, a driver without a head, and a destination lost to time. The phantom stagecoach of the Black Hills. The Black Hills of South Dakota have always been a little too quiet for comfort. The trees whisper, the rocks seem to watch, and sometimes, just sometimes, you hear the wheels. Not rubber, wood, not modern, old as in 1802, creaking, clattering, and slicing through the forest trails like a memory on repeat. The phantom stagecoach of the Black Hills doesn't show up often, but when it does, it never comes alone. Witnesses report a ghostly carriage barreling down forgotten routes, lit by lanterns that glow blue instead of gold. Sometimes, it's drawn by spectral horses with red eyes and no hooves. Other times, there are no horses at all, just the coach, moving on its own, wheels not touching the ground. And the driver? Headless. Naturally. Legend says the coach is cursed, that it once carried stolen gold, or perhaps something worse. A murderer on the run, a dying child, a letter that should never have been delivered. No one agrees on the story. But all the stories end the same. The stagecoach vanished mid-route, passengers never found, and now it returns on stormy nights to finish a journey it was never allowed to complete. People who've seen it report odd after effects, illness, confusion, lost time. One hiker claimed he saw the coach pass right through a pine tree like fog, then found himself 2 miles from where he started. Another said he heard the driver speak. In German, in Latin, in something that didn't sound like a human language at all. Sometimes, you'll find tracks, deep grooves in the dirt, wheel patterns from another century. They lead nowhere. They vanish mid-path, like the coach just lifted off into the air. Of course, skeptics say it's all optical illusion, wind, shadows, a trick of the brain when you're out too late in woods with too much folklore. But skeptics never see ghosts. That's kind of their thing. So, if you're walking the old trails near Deadwood and you hear hooves behind you but no one's there, don't turn around. And whatever you do, don't accept a ride. Because if a ghost coach is chasing gold, what happens when it's buried gold being chased by priests, miners, and curses? Let's talk about a certain lost mine next. One they say was built by a Padre and protected by silence. The Lost Padre Mine of New Mexico. There's something poetic about priests who dig for gold, men who were supposed to be saving souls, instead wielding pickaxes in the hopes of finding salvation in shiny metal. And in New Mexico, one such legend took root the lost Padre mine. The story goes like this. Sometime in the Spanish colonial period, a Catholic padre was sent to a remote mission in what is now New Mexico. He brought not just his Bible, but a team of indigenous laborers, a few soldiers, and one extremely vague idea of where to find divine intervention underground. And he found it, or claimed he did. A vein of gold so pure it practically preached on its own. For a while, he quietly mined it, smelting bars and hiding them in the nearby caves, maybe to fund his mission, maybe to buy favor from Spain, or maybe because even holy men aren't immune to a little gluttony when the ore glimmers just right. Then he vanished. Some say he was killed by his own men. Others say he sealed the mine himself, fearing greed would destroy more than it could enrich. The local indigenous people, who had been forced to dig, may have turned on him not out of vengeance, but justice. Either way, the location of the mine was lost. Over the years, dozens of treasure hunters have claimed to have found clues, an old rosary here, Spanish tools there, crosses carved into rock formations pointing like cryptic road signs. A few swore they saw gold bars stacked neatly in a cavern, only to return and find nothing but shadows and the sound of dripping water. There's even a recurring detail in multiple stories, a whisper, always in Spanish, always from just around the bend. No enters. Don't enter. Some believe the mine is cursed. Others think it was a colonial cover-up, erased to hide crimes of conquest. And then there are those who say it never existed at all, that it's just a tale made to give guilt a ghost. Still, the search continues. Maps are drawn, red X's marked, legends passed down in the back corners of cantinas. Because even when the soul is in question, gold makes a compelling sermon. And if you think buried gold is hard to explain, just wait until we get to a meteorite that dropped gold from the sky and somehow nobody knows how much or why it's even there. The unaccounted for gold from the Canyon Diablo meteorite, 1891. Let's take a moment to appreciate how weird this one is. A giant space rock slams into the Arizona desert, scatters molten death across miles of terrain, and inside, gold. Not a lot. Not Fort Knox. But enough to raise eyebrows, questions, and a few poorly thought-out mining operations. The Canyon Diablo meteorite struck long before anyone was around to appreciate it, but by the 1892nd, scientists and looters, same thing. Different hats were picking through the crater's remnants like it was an interstellar garage sale. Most of it was iron and nickel, sure. That's typical. But scattered among the debris were tiny traces of gold. Real gold. From space. Naturally, this led to speculation. Was it from the meteorite itself? Was the impact so violent it fused Earth's surface gold into the melted metal? Or was something even stranger going on, like a pocket of gold that had been hidden underground, only to be blown sky high by the meteor's arrival? Whatever the case, no one could figure out how much gold was in there, or where most of it went. The fragments with gold vanished into private collections, museums, or were lost in transit. One miner claimed he had a chunk with veins in it, but it mysteriously disappeared before he could have it verified. Another geologist reported finding metallic flecks that shouldn't exist in meteorite samples, elements out of alignment with Earth's typical crust. He later revised his claim and stopped giving interviews. Some blamed shoddy record-keeping. Others blamed the U.S. Geological Survey for hiding the truth because what's a mystery without a government cover-up? And, of course, the treasure hunters showed up. If gold rained from the sky once, they figured maybe more was buried under the crater. Whole areas were dug out illegally. Tourists chipped at rocks. One man tried to dynamite a section of the impact zone and was arrested for unauthorized cosmic archaeology. To this day, the total amount of gold from Canyon Diablo remains unknown. Scientists wave it off. Prospectors still dream. and a few desert weirdos insist that what fell wasn't just a rock, it was a message. Or a delivery. So what happens when people hide their gold instead of finding it in a meteor? Well, in Oklahoma, a whole nation might have done exactly that, and it's never been recovered. The disappearance of the Cherokee gold in Oklahoma, 1832. In the 1832, the U.S. government began forcibly removing the Cherokee Nation from their ancestral lands. You know the story. The Trail of Tears, thousands dead, treaties broken, and a legacy of trauma wrapped in bureaucratic cruelty. But somewhere in that tragic exodus is a mystery wrapped in something even colder than betrayal: gold. The Cherokee were known to have accumulated wealth, some in currency, some in goods, and some in gold. Families stored their wealth in hidden caches, often buried near homesteads, under trees, or in natural landmarks. The idea was simple: hide the valuables before soldiers arrived, return for them later. The problem? Most never returned. The forced march scattered the survivors across multiple states. Some died, some couldn't find their way back, others didn't trust anyone enough to retrieve it. And so, the legend of the Cherokee Gold was born. Tales spread of entire tribal treasuries hidden in Oklahoma hills, gold dust sealed in clay pots, woven baskets full of coins buried beneath creek beds. One persistent rumor involves a wagon loaded with gold that disappeared in the Kiamichi Mountains, its guards killed or lost in the chaos. Treasure hunters have combed the region ever since, metal detectors in hand, dreams of justice or greed in their eyes. Some claim to have found small caches, coins, jewelry, but nothing matching the legendary hoards. And of course, conspiracy theorists believe the gold was found long ago by settlers, soldiers, or opportunists who kept their mouths shut and their pockets full. There's also a more poetic theory, that some of the gold was never meant to be retrieved, that it was hidden as a final act of rebellion, a way to deny the government and the encroaching settlers the satisfaction of plunder. Better to let the earth keep it than see it used to fund your own displacement. So the hills of Oklahoma still whisper. Locals report dreams of buried treasure. Strange digging sites appear and vanish. And, every so often, someone finds something small, a button, a coin, a glint of metal, and wonders if they've brushed against history. And if that doesn't make your skin crawl, try lights that appear from nowhere, dance across the desert, and refuse to obey physics. Yes, we're talking about the Marfa lights, the strange lights of the Marfa Lights, Texas. Welcome to Marfa, Texas. Population, a few thousand. Cows, more than that. UFO sightings, more than both combined. Because for over a century, something or some things have been dancing in the desert sky just south of town, and no one, not a single soul, has come up with a satisfying explanation. They call them the Marfa lights, glowing orbs, flickering globes, swirling, pulsing lights that hover just above the desert floor, appearing randomly, then blinking out like they remembered they left the stove on. Colors shift red, white, yellow, sometimes blue. They split, merge, float, and then vanish. No sound, no smell, no source. First reported in the 1882 by ranchers who, to be fair, already had enough to worry about rattlesnakes, cattle thieves, the existential dread of the frontier. The lights were immediately labeled bad omens. But over time, they gained a reputation more like drunk ghosts doing interpretive dance. The lights always appear in roughly the same area, Mitchell Flat, near the Chinati Mountains. Scientists have tried to debunk them: ball lightning, reflections from headlights, atmospheric illusions. You know, all the usual suspects. But here's the kicker. The lights were being seen before cars existed, before highways, before electricity lit up the region. So unless Model Ts were traveling through time, that theory goes up in smoke. Locals, of course, have their own opinions. Some say it's ghosts of Spanish conquistadors, still lost and glowing with rage. Others claim it's buried native spirits, or the souls of cowboys who were double-crossed and left behind. One particularly specific theory suggests it's a sort of desert will-o'-the-wisp, mischievous desert fairies with performance anxiety. The military won't comment, because of course they won't. Tourists gather at designated viewing areas. Campers stare into the distance, beer in one hand, camera in the other, waiting for proof. Some see nothing. Some swear they see everything. The lights have never been caught up close, never explained, never predictable. They just happen, random, persistent, mocking. And the desert, as always, refuses to clarify. But if the Marfa lights tease you with uncatchable energy, the next mystery gets even more elusive because it involves a gunfighter whose past, future, and entire identity may have been one long disappearing act. The true identity of mysterious Dave Mather, 1882. They called him Mysterious Dave because alarming enigma with a revolver didn't fit on the wanted posters. Dave Mather was a gunfighter, lawman, occasional outlaw, and full-time question mark. He showed up in the 1882, mostly around Dodge City, Kansas, wearing a tight-lipped scowl and an aura of ambiguous menace. He served as a deputy marshal, killed a few people, with mixed reviews, and then just kept moving. Wherever he went, someone either died, quit their job, or suddenly moved out of town. But here's the thing. No one knows where he came from. Not really. Census records are fuzzy. Family connections are scarce. Birthplace? Possibly Connecticut. Or not. Every document seems to contradict the last. It's like he rewrote his past every time he crossed a county line. And then, of course, there's the matter of how he vanished. One day, Dave Mather was being tried for murder. Again. He beat the charges. Again. Then he walked out of court and disappeared forever. No death record. No grave. No final duel in the rain. Just poof like a noir cowboy who knew how to exit stage left. Some say he faked his death. Others think he was killed quietly by rivals, by the law, by someone who finally got tired of being on his maybe next list. A few legends claim he went to South America, or Canada, or joined a traveling circus under a new name and became a knife thrower. Honestly, that one's not even the strangest possibility. His surviving letters, if they are his, are cryptic, inconsistent. He signs different names, uses odd phrases. It's like he didn't just reinvent his life, he performed it. And yet, he was undeniably real. Bullet wounds, court records, testimonies, they all point to a man who existed, even if he didn't want to be understood. Which begs the question, was Dave Mather ever a real identity, or just the best lie anyone ever told in spurred boots? And speaking of lies etched into the land, the next mystery takes us to the banks of the Pecos River, where settlers claimed they saw something impossible, a pyramid, in Texas. With no explanation, and no one willing to find it twice. The Riddle of the Pecos River Pyramid, 1882. When you think of Texas, certain images come to mind. Cattle, mesquite trees, empty beer cans. But a pyramid? That's what early settlers along the Pecos River claim to have seen, a structure rising from the riverbank like an architectural hallucination. Not a massive monument like Giza, but still tall, symmetrical, distinctly not the kind of thing the West usually builds unless someone's compensating for something. The accounts are curiously consistent. Mid-1882, a group of surveyors was mapping the land near the river when they spotted a stone structure on the far bank, pyramid-shaped. Weather-worn, but intact. They approached, took notes, maybe even carved their names in the stone, as one does when confronted with ancient, mysterious monuments. Then they left to report it. And when they came back, nothing. Gone. Not even rubble. Some said it had been swept away by a sudden flood. Others claimed they'd gotten lost the second time and couldn't locate the site again despite having drawn maps. Then the stories got stranger. That the land shifted. That compasses spun in circles. That one man walked in a circle for 6 hours and swore the trees rearranged themselves. Over the years, others have claimed to find it. Always the same pattern. They see it, they leave, they try to return, and it's vanished. Like it hides when it's being looked for. Or worse, like it hides you. Some theorize it's a natural rock formation shaped by erosion, mistaken for something man-made. Others believe it's the remains of a pre-Columbian civilization long erased from mainstream history. A few naturally insist it's extraterrestrial. Because why not? Still, the fact remains. There's no photographic evidence, no physical samples, no official archaeological expedition has confirmed its existence. But the locals, well, the ones who talk swear it's real. That it shows itself only when it wants to be seen. And sometimes, late at night, fishermen along the Pecos claim they hear a humming, faint, mechanical, coming from the riverbank. So maybe there was a pyramid. Maybe it was built to be found only once. But if that's not unsettling enough, try explaining a gunman who faked death, went to prison, escaped, and may have never stopped killing. Buckskin Frank is up next. And his body count is still a question mark. The unsolved murder of Buckskin Frank. Leslie, 1882. Some men in the Wild West lived fast, died young, and were buried in borrowed boots. Buckskin Frank Leslie was not one of those men. He lived fast, sure. Killed more than his fair share. But dying? That's where things got uncertain. Leslie showed up in Tombstone in the early 882nd with a fancy nickname, a reputation that may or may not have been self-invented, and the kind of mustache that made people ask fewer questions. He worked as a bartender, a gambler, a gunslinger, and, at least once, a hotel manager, because even outlaws need a side hustle. He was charming, dangerous, and had an unfortunate tendency to solve arguments with bullets. He killed a man named Mike Killeen, and then married his widow, which even by frontier standards is a bold move. Later, he claimed the killing was self-defense. The courts agreed. Frontier justice has always had an open mind when charm is involved. But Frank didn't stop there. Over the years, more bodies dropped around him. Rivals, partners, romantic entanglements. He spent time in prison, escaped, got recaptured, then released again because apparently prisons in the Wild West had revolving doors and terrible paperwork. And then came the weirdest part, his supposed murder. In the 1922, it was reported that Buckskin Frank had been found dead, murdered, robbed, and dumped like any old outlaw whose story ran too long. Some obituaries ran. A few people nodded solemnly. And then he was spotted. Multiple times. Alive. In different towns. Letters surfaced. A few men claimed to have met him in California. One said Frank ran a small business under a false name and sold snake oil to tourists. Another claimed he was hiding out in Mexico, living off gold stashed from his Tombstone days. No body was ever confirmed, no grave reliably marked. Some even believe the murder was staged by Frank himself, tired of being hunted, or maybe just wanting the satisfaction of narrating his own death. To this day, nobody knows for sure where Buckskin Frank Leslie ended up. Dead in a ditch? Retired on a beach? Wandering ghost town ruins? Chuckling at tourists? Whatever the truth, his story lingers like gun smoke, and if Frank pulled off one last great trick, the next story might just outmatch him. Because now we turn to a missing Confederate gold train, a phantom engine with a vault full of vanished fortune. The missing Confederate gold train, 1865. As the Confederacy collapsed in 1865, its leaders were faced with several pressing problems: surrender, exile, and what to do with all that shiny stolen gold. Rumors swirled that a secret train loaded with Confederate gold, silver, and possibly important documents left somewhere in Georgia or Mississippi, heading west. Its destination? Uncertain. Its purpose? To hide the South's remaining fortune before it could be seized by the Union? And its final stop? That's the part nobody agrees on. Some say it was headed to Texas, the last viable Confederate stronghold. Others claim it was meant to cross into Mexico, where Confederate loyalists hoped to regroup and scheme. But somewhere along the route, maybe in Texas, maybe in New Mexico, the train disappeared. Not derailed, not captured, just vanished. Treasure hunters have combed railroad maps and Civil War records for decades. Theories abound. It was ambushed by deserters. It was sabotaged and buried in a collapsed tunnel. It was driven into an abandoned spur line and sealed behind a rock slide. Or maybe the Confederates buried the gold and destroyed the train themselves, erasing all trace of it to keep it hidden until the South could rise again, which, spoiler alert, it didn't. The most persistent legends center around a stretch of desert in West Texas, where locals claim an entire train engine is buried beneath layers of sand and scrub. At least one amateur explorer claimed he found the iron remnants of a boxcar door half buried in a dry arroyo. Another swore his metal detector screamed when he passed a certain patch of earth until it caught fire and melted. No official record of such a train exists, of course. Union archives mention intercepted communications, but nothing concrete. Confederate records were famously selective. And yet, bits of strange Confederate currency coins that should have been melted down still surface at swap meets and antique shows, sometimes wrapped in old cloth, sometimes with no provenance at all. So where did the gold go? Lost? Looted? Hidden in plain sight? All we know is that trains don't just vanish, except when they do. And if you hear a whistle in the desert at night with no tracks in sight, maybe don't follow it, because next up is a lone cowboy who rides the Big Bend trails like a ghost, always alone, always vanishing, always just out of reach. The Phantom Cowboy of Big Bend, early 1902. The Big Bend region of Texas is the kind of place that looks uninhabited even when you're staring at someone. Vast, empty, whispery. The wind doesn't blow, it talks. And sometimes it mentions a cowboy. He's always seen alone. Sometimes at dawn, silhouetted against the distant bluffs. Sometimes at dusk, just out of reach of a campfire's light. Always in the distance. Always riding slow, like he's got nowhere to be, and eternity to get there. Locals call him the Phantom Cowboy. And unlike some ghost stories, this one doesn't involve curses or revenge or old vendettas. This one's quieter, stranger, more unfinished. The first reported sighting was in the early 1902 by a couple of miners who thought he was a lost vaquero. They waved. He didn't wave back, he just kept riding. They followed briefly until he crested a hill and disappeared into thin air. No tracks, no horse sounds, nothing. Since then, dozens have seen him. Rangers, campers, drifters, always the same description. Tall rider, wide hat, old-fashioned saddle, dust trailing behind him that never settles. One man swore the rider turned toward him and had no face. Another said he heard humming a slow, tuneless melody that faded the moment he stepped forward. Some say he's the ghost of a cowboy who died of thirst, forever wandering for water he'll never find. Others think he was murdered, shot in the back and left in the desert, bones picked clean by buzzards. A few even believe he's not dead at all, but caught stuck between dimensions, a time-looping drifter doomed to repeat his last ride. There's no consistent location. He appears all over Big Bend, near the Rio Grande, on desert ridges, once even in the middle of an abandoned trailhead where no horse tracks could have reached. Sometimes he's close enough to see the fringe on his vest. Other times, he's just a shape in the heat haze. Try to chase him, and he vanishes. Try to ignore him, and you still hear the hoofbeats behind you. Always rhythmic, always distant, never stopping. He's not angry, he's not helpful, he's just there. A shadow carved into the land. A memory that refuses to die. And next, let's talk about a different kind of memory. A miner who cooked his meals next to a fortune and took the secret to his grave. Welcome to the Lost Dutch Oven Mine. The Lost Dutch Oven Mine. Sometimes, the Wild West felt like one long string of people finding something extraordinary and then immediately doing something colossally dumb, like not writing it down. Enter the story of the Lost Dutch Oven Mine, the least culinary sounding gold mystery ever wrapped in a kitchen utensil. Here's how it goes. Sometime in the 1802, a solitary prospector was traveling through a rugged canyon somewhere in the southwest. Most versions say Arizona or southern Utah, but specifics are a luxury this story doesn't have. He was alone, carrying only the essentials: a pickaxe, a pack mule, and crucially, a cast-iron Dutch oven. It was his cooking pot, his companion, and later, his accidental treasure marker. While camping near a dry creek, he struck gold, literally, a vein of it, exposed in the rock, glinting like temptation. He couldn't believe his luck. For weeks, he stayed near the spot, mining just enough to fill his pockets, always cooking his meals in the same location right next to the gold seam, by his trusty Dutch oven. Then, something happened. Illness, injury, paranoia, whatever the cause, he was forced to leave. But before doing so, he buried the Dutch oven right next to the gold, thinking it would serve as a marker when he returned. He never made it back. The details of his demise vary. One tale says he died in a saloon from a knife fight over a card game. Another says he was robbed on the trail, left to die clutching a blood-stained map. A third, even more dramatic version, claims he returned to the spot only to find the entire canyon had shifted due to a flash flood, and the gold, the oven, and the dream were gone. Treasure hunters have been searching ever since. The problem? There's nothing unique about a cast-iron Dutch oven in the 1802. Every camp had one. Every story from the frontier involves one. And yet this particular pot is the holy grail of cookware, a silent guardian of a gold strike that refuses to be found. Some say the mine is cursed. Others believe it never existed at all, just another prospector's fever dream turned into gold-plated folklore. But every few years, someone claims to have found the area. It's just like he described. There's iron in the soil. I saw scorch marks. Then nothing. Because even when you're standing on gold, the West has a habit of making it disappear beneath your boots. And speaking of vanishing beneath the earth, let's take a dark turn toward a ghost that's less symbolic and more literal. One that walks the banks of the Devil's River and doesn't seem to care who sees it. The case of the Devil's River Ghost, Texas, 1872. Devil's River. It's one of those names that makes you wonder why anyone would settle near it, let alone camp beside it. But in the 1872, settlers weren't exactly spoiled for choice. Rivers meant water, and water meant survival. Even if the river's name suggested, it might also mean death. That's where the stories start. It began with whispers from traders and soldiers, sightings of a pale figure walking the banks of the Devil's River late at night. A tall, emaciated form draped in tattered clothes, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Some said it moved like it was searching for something. Others claimed it followed them, silent as wind, footsteps making no sound in the gravel. One legend tells of a settler who woke to see the ghost standing at the foot of his bedroll. He shot at it. The bullet passed through. He ran. He didn't stop until he reached San Antonio. The man never slept outdoors again. Locals began referring to it simply as the Devil's River Ghost. It was blamed for missing cattle, spoiled water, even mysterious illnesses. But what was it? Some say it was the spirit of a murdered trapper who'd been scalped and left to die on the riverbank. Others insist it was a Spanish explorer who vanished in the area centuries earlier, still wandering, looking for a lost expedition. One particularly grim version claims it was a child abducted, killed, and left unburied. Whatever its origin, the ghost doesn't seem angry. It doesn't attack, it doesn't speak, it just watches. In the 20th century, a group of campers set out to debunk the story. They brought flashlights, cameras, audio recorders. They caught nothing, except one man swore he saw someone standing in the river in the middle of the night, unmoving, waist deep, staring at their camp. When he turned on his flashlight, the river was empty. He didn't come back the next year. To this day, some residents refuse to camp near that stretch of the river. They say the ghost doesn't like company. Or maybe it's waiting for someone to recognize it. Or worse, for someone to replace it. And if that haunting isn't enough, let's circle back to another historic tragedy, the Donner Party. You know the story. But what happened to their valuables after the cannibalism stopped? That part's still missing. The unexplained fate of the Donner Party's lost possessions. 1846. Ah, the Donner Party. Nothing like a frozen tableau of starvation and cannibalism to really spice up the American pioneer mythos. But underneath all the grisly headlines and the moral hand-wringing lies a quieter, unsolved question. What happened to all their stuff? When the survivors were rescued from the snow-choked Sierra Nevada in 1847, their ordeal became national news. But even then, people noticed something odd. Certain items, especially those known to have value, were never recovered. Not the food, obviously. That was long gone. But money, jewelry, heirlooms, documents, guns, all missing. Now, it's easy to assume that in the chaos of hunger and hypothermia, belongings were lost or abandoned. But several survivors testified that before the worst of the storm hit, their valuables were carefully packed away, buried under tarps or snow for safekeeping. Some even made notes of the exact spots. When rescue teams returned in the spring to bury the dead and retrieve what they could, those caches were empty. Theories abound. One is that opportunistic rescuers, yes, even the ones hailed as heroes, helped themselves to the property of the dead. A few were never seen again after that first trip, and those who returned were unusually tight-lipped. Another theory says the final survivors took what they could and sold it quietly, either to fund their new lives or erase the old one. There's even a darker theory, that someone still out there went back years later and dug it up. Maybe a guide, maybe a prospector who stumbled on something shiny in the snowmelt and kept digging. A few relics have surfaced at auctions, an engraved locket, a pistol with initials matching one of the victims. But where did they come from? And why won't the sellers talk? Historians still debate the total value of what was left behind. Some say it was minimal. Others claim the Donners had thousands in portable wealth, preparing to buy land and start fresh in California. And if that's true, it would be one of the greatest unsolved lootings in American history. All that remains now are bones, journal entries, and the sound of snow crunching in places where no one should still be walking. And if one pillbox of gold can go missing forever, what about a literal one? The next tale involves a gold cache hidden inside a natural rock formation, and no one's found it since. The mystery of the Pillbox Gold, Colorado, 1862. Some treasure legends are born from desperation, others from greed. But the Pillbox Gold mystery feels like it was born from the one universal truth of the Wild West. Someone always forgets where they left the good stuff. In the 1862nd, deep in Colorado's rugged mountain territory, a prospector named lost to time, as these legends demand, allegedly discovered a small but significant deposit of gold. The vein wasn't just rich, it was weird. The gold was located inside or near a distinct rock formation that looked uncannily like a giant stone pillbox. Rounded top, flat base, smooth sides. Locals described it as man-made, but not by any man they knew. The prospector extracted what he could, filled his saddlebags, and left the site with plans to return and dig it proper. But then the weather turned. A blizzard, a rock slide, maybe an ambush. The story changes depending on who's telling it, but the result was always the same. The prospector either died en route or was so disoriented by the mountains that he never found the pillbox again. Of course, he told people before disappearing, because what good is a mystery without loose ends? His story spread like wildfire, especially the bizarre detail about the rock formation. Some even claimed he had sketched it, a crude outline of a pillbox-shaped boulder with what looked like sun markings carved around its base. Maybe native, maybe alien, maybe just a bored miner's graffiti. Search parties went out. One man claimed he found a rock that fit the description, except there was no gold, just rattlesnakes and disappointment. Another said he found a stone dome near a dry creek, but the area flooded days later, and he never made it back. Over the decades, the legend persisted. Treasure hunters would hike into the hills with the vague description of somewhere west of the Arkansas River, north of where the wind feels wrong. And some still do. They talk about energy fields, magnetic anomalies, and compasses spinning in circles. But no one has ever found the pillbox rock again. No more gold, no confirmation, just a shape in the mind's eye, and the promise of wealth waiting patiently beneath stone that refuses to give up its secrets. And as long as we're on the topic of vanishing treasure guides, let's take a detour into Montana, where a native woman knew the location of a secret gold deposit, but when asked to show it, she simply never did. The Vanishing of the Lost Squaw's Mine, Montana, 1872. She didn't have a name, not in the records anyway. Just the Squaw, which, even for the 1872, was a dismissive label for a woman who may have known the location of one of the richest untapped gold sources in Montana history. The story begins in the 1872, near the upper Missouri River. A mining expedition, white prospectors, grizzled and greedy, encountered a Native American woman living alone, which already set off alarms. Some said she was a widow, others that she was exiled from her tribe. The details were vague, contradictory, and as usual filtered through the not-so-objective lens of frontier ego. But what they all agreed on was this: she had gold, nuggets, rough, pure, and unmistakably local. When asked where she got it, she simply said, it came from a river with two bends, where the sun meets the cave, which is either a poetic riddle or the 19th century version of none of your business. Naturally, the prospectors wanted more. They offered money, supplies, protection, and when that didn't work, some accounts say they tried threats. Still, she refused to take them to the source. Eventually, a few of them followed her. She spotted them, disappeared into the wilderness, gone. They never saw her again. The men searched for weeks, scouring the area she'd last been seen. No cave, no two-bended river, no sign of a gold vein. Just trees, rocks, mountains that all looked the same if you stared long enough. Years later, another prospector claimed to have found a cave matching her description. Inside, he said, were gold veins running like veins through the rock wall, thick, untouched, perfect. But when he returned with others, the cave was gone. Either a rockfall had sealed it, or, more likely, he'd never found it in the first place. To this day, the story of the Lost Squaw's Mine remains a bitter part of Montana folklore. Some believe the woman deliberately misled them, protecting her land and her people's knowledge. Others think she perished in the wilderness, taking the secret with her either out of defiance or simple survival. But the gold? It's never turned up. Just another treasure that the West chose to hide beneath legend and loose dirt. And speaking of legends tangled in death and doubt, Let's revisit the curious case of Johnny Ringo, a man who supposedly took his own life, but left behind more suspects than a courtroom drama. The unresolved fate of Johnny Ringo's death. 1882. Johnny Ringo was the outlaw everyone wanted to be. Educated, sharp, and stylish, in that deeply unsettling way where you're never sure if he's about to quote Latin or shoot you in the mouth. By 1882, he had tangled with the Earps, gotten sideways with Doc Holliday, and built a reputation as a man you didn't cross unless you were packing backup and a will. So when he was found dead at the base of a tree in the Cherokee Mountains, it should have been a closed case, a bullet wound to the head, his revolver in his right hand. No struggle. Verdict. Suicide. But then, people started asking questions. The kind of questions that make you wonder if anyone in the Wild West ever really died the way the report said they did. First, there was the matter of the gun. It had one spent round, but it was in his right hand, and Johnny Ringo was left-handed. Not impossible, but odd. Second, there were no powder burns strange for a close-range shot. Third, his boots were missing. Why would a man take off his boots to shoot himself? It's not like he was checking into a ghostly hotel. Rumors bloomed like wildflowers in manure. Some said Doc Holliday did it rode out to finish what Tombstone started. Problem is, Doc was allegedly in Colorado at the time, and not even he could teleport through tuberculosis. Others pointed fingers at Wyatt Earp, or some stray enemy of the cowboy gang seeking vengeance. One particularly persistent theory claims Ringo was drunk, passed out, and murdered his death, staged to look like suicide by someone who wanted to tie off a very dangerous loose end. There's even a fringe theory that he was killed by someone posing as a friend, someone who wanted Ringo gone, but not loudly. To this day, Ringo's grave lies beneath the very tree he died under, in a quiet spot that tourists can visit, but the truth never seems to. The case has never been reopened. The contradictions have never been resolved. And the man who may have held the answers? Dead by his own hand? Or someone else's? But what if an entire town followed that same path, vanishing so quickly, so quietly, that silence became its legacy? Let's head to Oregon, to a place called Shaniko, or at least, what's left of it. The mystery of the silent town of Shaniko, Oregon, early 1902. Shaniko, Oregon, was once known as the wool capital of the world. A bustling hub of commerce tucked away in the dry, golden plateaus of central Oregon, it had trains, telegraphs, hotels, and high hopes. For a while, it thrived. The wool came in from the ranches, the money rolled in. People bought land, built families, opened shops. By all appearances, Shaniko was on track to become one of the great inland cities of the Pacific Northwest. And then quiet. Not a slow decline, not a gradual economic slump, but an abrupt, eerie silence. Trains stopped running, businesses shuttered, children disappeared from schoolrooms. Within a few years, the population plummeted, leaving behind a well-preserved ghost town that felt more like a paused film than a collapsed settlement. The strange part? There was no defining disaster. No fire, no plague, no economic collapse that anyone can point to and say, "Ah, that's where it all went wrong." The local railroad line was diverted. Yes, but towns have survived worse. And yet, Shaniko just emptied. Locals whispered of something more, of business deals gone wrong in ways no newspaper ever covered, of odd lights seen out on the flats, of people leaving in the middle of the night without explanation. One rancher claimed his cattle refused to graze near the rail yard after 1907. Another said he heard music coming from the abandoned hotel, even though no one had entered it in a decade. Tourists who visit today report a kind of silence that feels thicker than normal, like the town is listening. The buildings are intact, well preserved. It doesn't feel dead, just waiting, like it expects someone to come back and finish what was started. Was Shaniko part of a cover-up? Was it a victim of industry's cold hand? Or did something older, something harder to explain, decide the town had served its purpose? Whatever the answer, it never left a note. And if lost towns with unfinished endings aren't enough to scratch your mystery itch, consider this. What if there are silver mines in the Guadalupe Mountains so rich they could have rewritten history if only anyone could find them twice? The lost Spanish silver mines of the Guadalupe Mountains. The Guadalupe Mountains sit like a spine of ancient bones across West Texas and New Mexico, jagged, weathered, and stubbornly indifferent to anyone trying to make sense of them. But buried somewhere within that rocky chaos, legend says, are mines so rich in silver that even the Spanish crown couldn't keep track of their yield. The story goes that Spanish explorers, priests, and soldiers alike found the silver in the 1602nd or 1702nd and began working it quietly. Not massive operations, but secret ones. They brought enslaved native workers, built small, hidden smelters, and extracted precious ore under the veil of religious missions. But the mines didn't last. Not because they ran out, but because they were lost. Some say Apache or Comanche raids drove the Spanish out, killing the miners and sealing the tunnels behind them. Others believe the priests deliberately collapsed the entrances to prevent further exploitation, perhaps after witnessing too much death, too many curses, or just getting sick of watching conquistadors trip over their own hubris. Modern treasure hunters have scoured the Guadalupe Range for signs. Old Spanish tools, strange rock carvings, even entire tunnels half buried under centuries of erosion. Every few years, someone claims they've found a real lead, a silver ingot, a crucifix, a hidden shaft. But the trail always dies where the mountain gets serious. There's one cave in particular, its location vague, of course said to have been found by a rancher in the 1922nd. He claimed to see stacked silver bars and strange symbols on the walls. He brought back a chunk of ore, and then classic move failed to relocate the site. Either the entrance was buried, or the mountain rearranged itself in protest. Skeptics say there's no proof. Historians argue the Spanish lacked the infrastructure for deep mining in the region. But those same historians can't explain why locals still report seeing flickering torchlight deep in the hills, or why compasses behave erratically near certain limestone ridges. Maybe it's just folklore with a good press agent. Or maybe there's silver still waiting, silently sealed inside a mountain that doesn't want company. And speaking of things lost in the desert, our next mystery involves an entire wagon train that set out west in 1853 and never made it. Not one survivor, not one wheel, just wind and sand, and a story that refuses to die. The enigma of the lost wagon train of 1853, Nevada. Wagon trains vanish all the time in fiction. Storms, bandits, starvation, it's a trope. But in 1853, somewhere in the desolate wastes of Nevada, one entire wagon train vanished in real life so thoroughly that it left behind nothing. It began as a standard westward expedition, a group of families, traders, and adventurers heading toward California. They left Utah, passed through western Nevada, and were expected to re-emerge somewhere near Pyramid Lake, but they didn't, ever. No bodies, no wagons, no graves, just silence. A search party was sent out weeks later when they failed to arrive at their scheduled stop. They found tracks for a time, wheel ruts, hoof prints, the usual signs. Then the trail just ended. Clean. As if the entire caravan had been plucked from the earth like a badly written subplot. Later searches found nothing but dry earth and sun-bleached rocks. No campsites, no discarded items, no bones. One prospector claimed he found a rusted horseshoe in a nearby canyon, but it could have belonged to anyone, or no one. Over the years, theories sprouted like desert weeds. The most logical, they lost their way and died of thirst. But that still doesn't explain the lack of any remains. Even the desert gives back bones eventually. Other theories? they were ambushed and buried. They stumbled onto sacred land and were taken. Some whisper about underground caves, swallowed wagons, and the occasional claim that ghostly wagon wheels can still be heard rattling through the canyons at night. There's even a claim that the train reappeared briefly in the 1922nd. A pilot flying over the area said he saw what looked like a row of wagons deep in a ravine, old and weather-worn, as if frozen in time. When he returned with others, the ravine was empty. Was it a mirage? A hallucination? Or a glimpse through a wrinkle in time? Whatever the truth, the lost wagon train of 1853 became one of Nevada's oldest desert riddles, a hole in the historical record, too clean to dismiss, too strange to explain, and just plausible enough to keep drawing people in. And now, from wagons to horses specifically, one legendary steed with a fate so bizarre it made people wonder if ghosts don't ride horses, they become them. The unexplained death of Porter Rockwell's horse, 1872. Porter Rockwell was many things: a bodyguard, a lawman, a bounty hunter, and, depending on who you asked, either a holy avenger or a sanctified lunatic with a hair-trigger moral compass. He was the destroying angel of Mormon lore, a man believed to be divinely protected from harm so long as he never cut his hair. And whether or not that claim was true, Rockwell managed to outlive a suspicious number of gunfights. But it wasn't Porter who died under mysterious circumstances. It was his horse. The animal, known locally as Old Smiler, had carried Rockwell through countless confrontations, chases, and narrow escapes. Described as big, jet black, and unnervingly intelligent, Old Smiler was not the kind of horse you borrowed or approached lightly. Locals said the horse could follow commands without a word, knew when to move without being touched, and would bite anyone who tried to saddle him that wasn't Porter himself. Then, one morning in the 1872nd, Rockwell found the horse dead. No wounds, no tracks, no indication of poisoning. Just lying in the middle of his corral, eyes open, body unmarked. The corral itself was undisturbed. The latch hadn't been tampered with. The surrounding dust was untouched. It was as if the horse had simply collapsed and died mid-thought. Porter, by all accounts, took the death hard, very hard. Witnesses said he refused to speak for days. When he did, he told someone that the devil had done it himself. Later, he reportedly had the horse buried in secret, refusing to let anyone near the body. Naturally, theories sprang up like desert brush. Some said Old Smiler was targeted not to kill Porter, but to weaken him, to send a message. Others believed Rockwell had kept gold hidden in the saddle and someone had murdered the horse while searching for it. And then there are those who lean spiritual. That Old Smiler had absorbed one of the many bullets meant for Porter's own head, finally cashing in on a divine pact the horse never agreed to. Regardless of the truth, Porter was never quite the same afterward. He rode slower, took fewer jobs, spoke more to shadows than to people. And if horses can die of invisible causes, what happens when the rider disappears too? Let's head to the Superstition Mountains, home of the lost Dutchman mine, and a ghost who just might still be guarding what he found. The Phantom Rider of the Superstition Mountains. There's something about the Superstition Mountains in Arizona that attracts missing persons reports like they're trying to break a record. The Lost Dutchman's mine is the main legend. Of course, millions of dollars in gold supposedly hidden somewhere in that unforgiving rock maze. But gold isn't the only thing people claim to see out there. There's also the rider. He's seen on high ridgelines, always alone, dressed in dark clothes, wide-brimmed hat, sometimes with a bandana covering his face. His horse is usually described as black or gray, or more chillingly, not quite touching the ground. The rider doesn't move like a living man. His body stays stiff. The horse doesn't make a sound. No hoofbeats, no snorts, no dust trail. Some believe it's Jacob Waltz himself, the infamous Dutchman, returned from the grave to guard the gold he refused to share in life. Others think it's someone else entirely, a lost soul who stumbled into the mine, took something they shouldn't have, and was cursed to ride the mountains until time gives up trying to measure itself. The sightings go back over a century. Ranchers report seeing the rider at dusk, only to blink and find him gone. Hikers have turned a corner and found fresh hoofprints on rocky ground where no horse could have logically been. A few even claim the rider has watched them turn slowly, deliberately, as if deciding whether they deserve to keep walking. One man said the rider passed within 20 feet of him. The air turned cold, his flashlight flickered. The rider never turned his head, never slowed down. Just kept going, straight into a canyon wall that should have stopped him but didn't. Paranormal investigators have tried night surveillance, motion sensors, trail cams. All fail mysteriously in the areas where the rider is seen most often. Batteries drain, signals jam. One drone pilot reported his machine going haywire and crashing, only to find the footage corrupted, except for a few frames. A rider's silhouette on the edge of a cliff, unmoving. Is it a ghost, a mirage, or the last warning before you find something buried that was never meant to be found? And speaking of treasure that slipped through a dying man's fingers, let's talk about Frank Pinto, the prospector who found a gold strike, bragged about it, and promptly died before revealing where it was. The lost Pinto Basin, Gold, California, 1892. Frank Pinto wasn't a subtle man. He was a prospector of the loud-mouthed, dust-covered, vaguely suspicious variety, always bragging, always a little too tan, always flashing a grin that said, "I know something you don't." In the 1892, that something was gold. Specifically, gold he claimed to have discovered in what's now known as Pinto Basin, deep in California's desert Badlands, part of modern-day Joshua Tree National Park. Pinto showed up in a nearby town one day with gold dust in a pouch, enough to make even the skeptical sit up straighter. He claimed to have found a rich vein out in the basin. Said it was practically oozing from the rocks. Naturally, everyone asked him where it was. Naturally, he wouldn't say. He promised to lead a proper expedition. "After I get my affairs in order," he said. "After I rest up." But then of course he died. Sudden illness, some say. Others whispered poisoning. Maybe a robbery gone wrong. A few suggested he got spooked by what he found and decided not to go back. Either way, he never shared the location. No map, no journal, no drunken slip of coordinates at the saloon. Just rumors and the scattered trail of failed expeditions. Dozens of men have searched the Pinto Basin over the last 100 years. They find rock formations that match vague descriptions, caves that look promising, but never any gold. Some return sunburned and dehydrated. Others never return at all. Modern adventurers bring GPS systems, drones, satellite maps. Still nothing. The desert seems to shift, to guard itself. And Pinto's treasure, if it ever existed, remains buried under layers of time, sand, and salt. Some say the gold was real. Others think Pinto staged the whole thing to inflate his legend or secure funding. But the myth persists because the location feels plausible. The basin is remote, treacherous, full of odd mineral patterns, and places where heat shimmer can trick your eyes into seeing things that were never there. Maybe the gold is still out there, waiting. Maybe it was a lie. Or maybe Pinto told someone, and they're the one who made sure he stayed quiet. And if you think a stagecoach loaded with gold could vanish without a trace, just wait until one actually did. That's next. The disappearance of the Overland Mail Company's gold, 1862. In the 1862, the Overland Mail Company was the Amazon Prime of the Wild West, minus the drones and 2-day shipping. They hauled letters, parcels, payrolls, and, every now and then, serious treasure across some of the most unforgiving terrain in America. That's what makes the story of the lost gold shipment so maddening. It vanished while doing something routine. The tale begins on a route between Nevada and California. A stagecoach operated by the Overland Mail Company was said to be transporting a large shipment of gold, possibly destined for a government payroll, maybe a mining company's reserve, maybe just another anonymous fortune hoping to quietly change hands. Exact records? Spotty at best, which is extremely convenient for a mystery. Somewhere in the desolate stretch of road between Carson City and Placerville, the stagecoach never arrived. Search parties were dispatched. What they found was worse than nothing. They found partial nothing. A broken wheel, a blood-stained hat, one horse found wandering alone. No coach, no cargo, no bodies. It was as if the desert had swallowed the whole operation mid-sentence. Theories bloomed like dust devils. One popular version suggests the coach was ambushed by outlaws who took the gold and buried it nearby, intending to return later, only to be killed before they could retrieve it. Another theory? The driver and guard faked the robbery and vanished with the treasure. Trouble is, neither of them ever turned up rich or at all. And then there's the weird stuff. One scout reported seeing drag marks in the sand like the coach had been pulled off the road, but they ended at a cliff. No wreckage below, no impact site, just more sand. Another account tells of a prospector who found what he described as an old chest filled with melted coins, buried near a dried-up riverbed. He took one gold piece and, predictably, was never seen again. Over the decades, the area has been picked clean by amateur treasure hunters. Some swear they found clues, a fragment of harness, a piece of wood with initials burned in, but the bulk of the treasure remains missing. If it ever existed. But if a stagecoach can vanish without a trace, perhaps it wasn't just greed at work. Maybe something older, something cursed. Something like the town of Bodie, California, where misfortune follows anyone who dares take a souvenir. The Curse of Bodie Ghost Town, California. Bodie, California, is one of those ghost towns that feels too intact. Frozen in decay, it's all cracked wood, leaning staircases, and windows that look back at you. Founded in the late 1802, Bodie was a gold boomtown, violent, wild, and fast-burning. It once held over 10,000 residents, 65 saloons, and a crime rate that made the devil blush. Then the gold ran out, or the greed got bored. Either way, the town collapsed, and by the early 20th century, Bodie was abandoned. But it didn't stay quiet. Visitors began reporting strange occurrences, footsteps echoing in empty hallways, children's laughter in the schoolhouse, faces peering from the windows of the long empty church. Tools move, doors open. Candles relight themselves in rooms with no drafts and no candles. One man claimed his car broke down every time he tried to leave. But the real legend? The curse. Bodie has a strict no-souvenir policy. Not for historical preservation, though, that's the official reason, but because of what happens to those who take things. Tourists who pocket even a rock or a rusted nail often find themselves victims of swift and ironic misfortune. Bad luck, accidents, illness, divorce, appliances spontaneously combusting. One letter sent to the Bodie Museum read, "Please take this back. Since I stole it, I've lost my job, my house, and my sanity." The museum now keeps a box of returned items, each one tagged with a story, some tragic, some absurd, all from people who swore their lives unraveled the moment they took a piece of Bodie with them. Rational minds call it coincidence, self-fulfilling prophecy. Tourists who feel guilty and start blaming bad luck on superstition. Maybe. But why does the pattern repeat so consistently? Some believe the town's violent past soaked into the soil. Others say the spirits of Bodie's dead still walk its streets, protecting their own from disrespect. Or maybe the curse isn't supernatural at all, just the natural consequence of taking something that doesn't belong to you. Either way, if you visit, keep your hands to yourself. But if stolen goods can curse the living, what about ancient remains tied to fabled treasure? The next story involves a mysterious cave, skeletal guardians, and whispers of the 7 cities of gold. The unidentified skeletons of the lost mine of the 7 cities, Arizona. The 7 cities of gold were a fantasy wrapped in geography and sold wholesale to conquistadors. Cibola, Quivira, the mythical cities paved in gold, guarded by riches, and crucially not real. Or so we've been told. But what if one of them left something behind? In Arizona, there's a legend about a group of explorers early 1902 or late 1802, depending on the version, who stumbled across a hidden cave in a canyon. Inside, human skeletons, dozens of them, arranged in eerie formations. Some were seated, others reclined, all facing the same direction, as if attending a sermon long since ended. More disturbingly, alongside the remains were artifacts that didn't match local native cultures. Ornate ceramics, beaded garments, and allegedly gold plates etched with unknown symbols. The men took what they could carry. They left the bones. Because priorities. When they returned with help, the cave was gone, or sealed, or the canyon had changed. No matter how closely they retraced their steps, the cave refused to be found again. Some claimed it was a mirage. Others thought they'd trespassed on sacred ground and the land had hidden itself in self-defense. But stories started to swirl. People had seen the cave. Hikers found odd bones near cliffs. A rancher claimed he heard chanting from an empty canyon at night. Then came the connection to the 7 cities. The skeletons, some said, weren't just ancient, they were wrong. Too tall, too thin, skulls elongated unnaturally. Was it a long-lost tribe? An ancient race? Survivors of an expedition that never made it into the history books? Historians, naturally, rolled their eyes. No proof, no samples, just rumors and shadows. But even they couldn't explain why the same story popped up from different sources decades apart, always the same details, always the same disappearing cave. Today, the region is dotted with unofficial searchers, modern-day conquistadors, hoping to find a crack in the stone that leads to gold, mystery, or at least a cool Instagram photo. But the cave remains sealed. The bones remain unseen. And if the lost cities were real, maybe their sentinels never left. And if one building in Tombstone barely survived the flames of history, what caused the mysterious fire that nearly ended its legend before it began? Let's step into the smoke-filled past of the Birdcage Theater. The mysterious fire at the Birdcage Theater, Tombstone, 1882. The Birdcage Theater in Tombstone, Arizona, equal parts saloon, brothel, gambling den, and theater, was less a place of culture and more a dive bar with ambitions. It never closed, not once. Operated 24/7 for 8 years straight. By some miracle, or perhaps just the sturdy constitution of its clientele, it survived the worst excesses of the Old West: gunfights, brawls, economic collapse, family drama. And then came the fire. In the late 1882, after years of uninterrupted debauchery, the Birdcage Theater was nearly destroyed by a mysterious blaze. The fire ignited one night after a particularly rowdy show. No one could say exactly how it started. One minute, whiskey was flowing and a piano was being murdered in C-sharp. The next, smoke, flames, and screaming. The fire was fast, almost intelligent. It jumped from room to room, dodged the water buckets, seemed to seek out specific corners. The damage was significant but curiously selective. The stage curtains? Gone. Several back rooms? Charred. But the main hall? Intact. The poker tables and gambling equipment? Miraculously untouched. The bullet holes in the walls? Preserved like artifacts in a museum that smelled like gunpowder and perfume. An investigation, such as it was, couldn't determine the cause. Some blamed an overturned oil lamp. Others suspected foul play. A rival business owner, perhaps. Or a disgruntled employee tired of serving whiskey to men who couldn't spell theater if you spotted them all the vowels. Then there's the third theory. The place burned itself. Not literally, of course, but as a kind of purging. as if the building had soaked up too much sin and chaos and decided to self-combust in protest. The walls had seen too much. The floorboards creaked from the weight of secrets. Modern paranormal enthusiasts love the birdcage theater, cold spots, disembodied voices, phantom footsteps in the balcony. But some investigators say the energy spiked after the fire, as if something was released or invited. The building was repaired and reopened because, again, this was Tombstone, and no one lets a little fire stop a good time. But something changed. The laughter felt thinner, the shadows longer. Maybe the fire was just a fire. Or maybe something tried to shut the curtain and missed. And if you think flaming theaters are strange, wait until you hear about the Adams diggings, where every man who found the gold either vanished or died before giving directions. The Lost Adams Diggings Gold, New Mexico, 1862. It's the kind of story that practically begs to be turned into a Western tragedy. A hidden canyon, a stash of gold big enough to fill saddlebags, and a man named Adams who found it and lost it. And then found it again, and then lost himself. The legend begins in the 1862, when a group of prospectors led by a man known only as Adams were shown a hidden canyon in New Mexico by an Apache guide. It was deep, narrow, and difficult to reach. Inside, a stream filled with black sand and glittering nuggets, gold everywhere, more than they could carry. The guide gave them one condition: don't leave the canyon, not until he came back. Naturally, the men didn't listen. They explored, wandered. One ventured beyond the canyon walls and was reportedly found scalped. Then, one by one, the others began to vanish. Some claimed they were attacked. Others suspected betrayal from within the group. Maybe someone wanted a bigger share. Maybe someone just snapped. Only Adams survived. Barely. He staggered into a nearby settlement, delirious and sunburned, carrying a handful of gold and a story no one believed. But that story, it spread. Adams tried to find the canyon again. Took dozens of men on multiple expeditions. Nothing. The land had changed. The rock formations were wrong. Or maybe the guide had lied. Or maybe the gold had never been real. But then, others claimed to have seen it. A former Confederate soldier said he found a canyon with rich sands, but lost his map in a flash flood. A Mexican prospector described a valley that shined like sin, only to be shot in a saloon before he could lead anyone back. The U.S. government even took mild interest at one point, sending a geological team to investigate only to have them report no findings of commercial value, followed by suspicious silence. The Adams diggings have never been found, but the legend lingers like smoke over the New Mexico canyons. Some say the canyon was swallowed by a landslide. Others believe it was cursed, guarded by spirits who punish those who take without gratitude. And speaking of spirits, there's one in Kansas who's reportedly still walking through the plains, past the ghost towns, whispering to travelers in the wind. Let's talk about Smoky Hill, the ghost of Smoky Hill, Kansas, 1872. The Kansas plains are the kind of place where silence grows like grass, endless sky, flat horizons, and wind that doesn't so much blow as linger. And somewhere along the old Smoky Hill Trail, that wind carries something else. A voice, a figure, a ghost. Smoky Hill was once a key route for travelers heading west. Wagon trains, soldiers, outlaws, mail riders. It was dusty, deadly, and far lonelier than maps suggest. Somewhere along this trail, a frontiersman known only as Smoky Hill met his end, maybe ambushed, maybe starved, maybe simply worn down by the weight of wandering too long. The details vary, but the effect does not. People traveling that same route in the 1872nd began to report sightings of a lone figure walking ahead of them, always ahead, never looking back. He was tall, dressed in buckskin, hat pulled low. Some said he carried a rifle. Others claimed he was barefoot. He never acknowledged anyone, never turned around. Just kept walking until the trail bent, or the fog thickened, and then he was gone. More unsettling were the sounds. Hitchhikers and teamsters alike claimed to hear boots crunching behind them, only to spin around and find nothing. One man said he heard someone muttering prayers in an unfamiliar dialect, as if trying to keep himself company. Another swore he shared a campfire with a silent stranger who vanished before dawn, leaving behind dry footprints that led nowhere. By the 20th century, the legend of Smoky Hill had become a regional ghost story. Parents warned children not to follow voices at dusk. Truckers on back roads claimed their radios cut out in the same stretch where Smoky was said to roam. One modern camper reported waking to find a man standing at the edge of their sight, silhouetted by the moon, watching, but not moving. Why does he linger? Some believe Smoky was betrayed by his companions, left to die, and now walks in search of justice. Others think he simply loved the land too much to leave. Or maybe he never realized he died. Whatever the truth, the trail still feels heavy where he's been seen. Like the past is closer there. Like footsteps echo longer. And if a single man's ghost can haunt a region, imagine what a whole gang's worth of stolen loot might be hiding somewhere in the remote hills of Wyoming. The unfinished business of the hole-in-the-wall gang's hidden loot. In the red sandstone crags of northern Wyoming, tucked between outcrops and valleys so remote they might as well be on Mars, lies Hole in the Wall, a natural fortress, an outlaw stronghold, and perhaps the most successful open secret hideout in Wild West history. For over a decade, it was the favorite nest of some of the West's most infamous criminals. Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and a rotating cast of thieves who made up what was loosely known as the Hole-in-the-Wall Gang. Butch and friends used the place like it was a vacation rental, with significantly more gunpowder and whiskey. When the heat was on, when posses got too close, or when the bank started printing wanted posters with better sketches, the gang would disappear into the labyrinth of canyons, smug in the knowledge that no lawman with a horse and half a brain would follow them into that god-forsaken maze. They robbed trains, they hit banks, they knocked over payroll shipments, and then they vanished into thin air. And here's where things get interesting. Despite dozens of successful heists, relatively little of the gang's loot was ever recovered. Sure, some members were eventually caught with money, but the vast majority of the take tens of thousands in gold, silver, currency, bonds was never accounted for, which has led many to believe the gang buried their treasure somewhere in or around Hole in the Wall. It would have made sense. They were constantly on the run, and you can't exactly deposit stolen railroad bonds at the local bank without raising a few eyebrows. Plus, these guys were planners, methodical. They used lookouts, they mapped escape routes. It's not hard to imagine them hiding large sums in crevices, caves, or beneath fake rock piles with cryptic markers known only to the crew. But the clues never amounted to much. A rusted pistol found beneath a ledge, a scratched-in map on an old water trough, tales passed down from aging cowboys. They put it under the twin rocks. There was a stone shaped like a skull. You'll know you're close when your horse gets spooked. Treasure hunters have scoured the area for years, but the terrain is vast and unforgiving. The elements erase footprints, landslides hide caves, and if anyone ever did find the cache, they either took it in silence or never made it out to tell the tale. And so, the hole in the wall remains a metaphor, as much as a place an opening into the myth of the Wild West, where justice was flexible, money vanished like smoke, and the real treasures were the stories left behind. Of course, those stories never really end. They just circle back, haunting us like a rider on a moonlit trail, or a fire that starts without a spark, or a canyon that devours wagons, or a name scratched into an unmarked grave. The West never buries its secrets deep enough.